Yeah, thanks for having me. So my name is Aude Claire Fourot. I'm an associate professor in political science at Simon Fraser University in Canada, BC. And so today I'm going to talk about the accessibility of refugees and asylum seekers to the housing market. And I'm going to insist specifically on the roles of local actors. So can I change the slides, or is someone, okay, great, thank you very much. So I'm just going to start with the really brief overview of, like the relocation of refugees and asylum seekers, like system in France. I'd like to start with mentioning that there is a kind of governmental hyperactivity towards in the area of immigration. And the tendency is towards more restrictive immigration and asylum laws. So just to give you an idea, since 1945, France have passed at least one immigration law every 2 years. So things are changing very fast here in France. And just in terms of paradoxes, what is also interesting is that if on the one hand, there is, like for instance, an augmentation of obligations to leave French territory, in practice, like this execution rate has dropped. So, like there is some paradoxes in terms of how, the law is implemented. I mean, how the law is implemented. There's some paradoxes here. Next slide, please. Okay, so cities do not have a word to say in terms of immigration and asylum laws, but yet they do face, like the concrete aspects of forced migration. And so basically, these are the three themes that I'm going to explore today with you. So we all know that refugees and asylum seekers converge towards cities because, of course, like there are more resources available to them. There is, like the presence of larger ethnic communities. People speak potentially, the same language, so they converge towards the city. Cities, on the other hand, try, like of course, to manage what has been called, the kind of magnet effect. And the problem is that there is a lack of public resources dedicated to the housing. And so one of the consequences is that people, live in camps, city camps. They tend to occupy empty buildings, which, also leads to new policies from the national states that I'm going to, detail later on. But what we call, and I think that you also mentioned that, it was also mentioned in the previous presentation, dispersion policies or relocation policies. So can we change for the next slide, please? So here, this is one illustration of what has been called like the magnet hypothesis and the creation of urban squats or slums. So that's basically, like what I just described, using this kind of mechanism. So starting with, like a deliberate lack of housing options, because this is this idea that, like it's kind of a deterrent strategy. Okay, well, like you're not going to be welcome, so it's better not to come here. But it doesn't work. And this lack of housing options creates, overcrowded shelters, which in turn, leads to camps and building occupation, police operation, dispersion policies. But we know that, in fact, migrants tend to come back towards cities. And so, there is this kind of a vicious circle here. Can we change for the next slide, please? Okay, thank you. So here, this is an example of what happened, like before the relocation policies and after. So in 2015, and then you see, like the presence of migrants in camps, like in 2018, 2019. And so what you can see is that there's fewer people, that people have been pushed, away from the city center, but they are still there. And so the problem remains. This is, next slide, please. This is not necessarily a problem that is specific to Paris or the Parisian region, because you have, you know, like the same tendency in larger cities in France. And so here are some pictures of squats and camps in Lyon and in the Grand Lyon, so in the metropole of Lyon. Just pictures. Next slide. Thank you. So here I'm just gonna say more. I mean, I'm gonna explain, you know, like what dispersion and regionalization policies are. So they were studied to be implemented in 2015 in order to find a solution of what has been called the jungle de Calais, and we can talk about that in the discussion if you want. But so in order, you know, like to dismantle this jungle, the local state, so it's in fact, you know, like a national policy, but they ask, you know, like mid-sized and small cities to house asylum seekers and refugees, so in, you know, like in their centers. And so that resulted in the creation of more housing options outside of big cities. So that's what has been called a dispersion strategy. And so there are many reasons for that. One is the idea that, you know, like if you don't have all, you know, like the migrants at the same place, it's in fact easier to deal with them, because you can deal with them on an individual basis rather than, you know, like dealing with a collective, for instance. But it's also, you know, like a cost saving strategy, because, you know, like in small cities, even in some cases, you know, like in rural areas, the renting, you know, like an empty building is actually cheaper than doing that in a big city. And so it's less expensive for the state. It's also, you know, like less expensive to rent those buildings rather than to house asylum seekers and refugees in hotels. Can we change the, yeah, thank you. So how do local actors react to this state injunction? So as was mentioned by the first speaker, the first Swedish speaker, it can be considered as a golden opportunity. I think that's what you mentioned, you know, like at the beginning. Because some small centers, some small cities see that there is an opportunity. There is an opportunity here for revitalizing their centers. So in most of the cases, those cities face economic and demographic challenges, and so it's a way basically to have you know, like more people, to keep schools open and so on. So it has been, you know, like considered as a golden opportunity by some, but, you know, like of course the situation is very diverse, and in other cases, you know, like local actors were quite hostile to welcome new migrants in their cities. For migrants, it's they often say, or for migrants, for asylum seekers, refugee, they often say that living in small cities, small places is actually, you know, like a way to rest, because there's less police control, especially if you compare, you know, like living if you live in a camp, you know, like in Paris, there's, you know, like many controls. Many daily controls, so they often mention that it's a way, you know, like to rest, but yet at the same time it also creates new forms of forced mobility, because, you know, like those buildings are often very far from, you know, like the city center. I'm not talking here about, you know, big cities, but just the fact that you have to walk, you know, like for maybe 1 hour before, you know, like being able to get, you know, like to a boulangerie, to I forgot, you know, like the name in English, but to a bakery. So, you know, like there is the new forms of forced mobility that have been also highlighted. In terms of what are the types of the welcome, the reception, the centers, it's again, you know, like very contrasted. In some cases, the reception is facilitated because, you know, like can we change the Ah, no, okay. Oh, no, go back. Go back. Yeah, sorry. I thought that, no. Yeah, I thought that it was not in the slide, but it is. Yeah, in some cases it is facilitated because of the closeness of local actors. But again, you know, like there's no unique role. In other cases, you know, like the welcome is actually was not that easy. One particularity, I think, of France is the fact there is lots of engagement of civil society actors, but it's not really institutionalized, particularly if you compare with Canada. So it's a kind of a fragile situation here. And many refugees and asylum seekers do not stay in those small centers or small cities, and so their retention is one of the big issue. And so all this result that I just presented is actually, you know, part of a special issue that I've co-directed with Ashleen, who's going to talk next, and Anouk Flamand, who is not able to join here today, but you will be able basically to have access to some of these results here. It's going to be published hopefully, you know, like at the end of the year. So next slide. And so finally, I just wanted to say a few words regarding, you know, like the new roles for cities, because the tendency is actually to incorporate cities in the governance of migration. And since, I mean, a year ago, the French state decided to partner with cities. And so the state implemented territorial contracts for reception and integration of refugees and asylum seekers. And so basically here you have the details on the slides, but the idea is to fund, you know, like cities in order to implement specific actions. And so first, you know, like the city, the local, state, and civil society actors have basically, you know, like to make the portrait of the situation. So to start, you know, like with an audit, and then, you know, like decide on specific activities that are going to be implemented by NGOs. And that's, you know, like as you mentioned, you know, like previously, such activities include, you know, like French language classes, housing, employment opportunities. For instance, in Lyon, one objective was to basically engage private landlords, you know, like how we can make sure that they're going to rent basically their places to refugees. So that was one example, for instance, of the action that are being implemented at the local level. And so currently there are 11 contracts that have been signed, and there's going to be more to come. Thank you very much.